last topic that we're going to be studying under forms of market is oligopoly. Oligopoly is the last form of market that we're studying in this chapter, and it's very similar in some ways and very different in other ways from the rest of the market forms that we've studied about so far. तो हम oligopoly के ये features देखते हैं, and oligopoly does not have a the demand curve or the cost and revenue structure of oligopoly is not really important in our syllabus, so we're kind of ignoring that for now. But anyway, we need to know the features, which is very important, the characteristics of the market form of oligopoly. Let's start discussing them one by one. The first one being there are a small number of sellers, and by small number of sellers we mean there are very few, right? So very few or handful of sellers. This is the first feature of oligopoly and very very important defining characteristic of oligopoly. तो इसमें क्या होता है, एक मार्केट स्ट्रक्चर है, ठीक है, उसमें मतलब there is only a very few handful of people are supplying the good. The good is being produced by few sellers. So these sellers are the only suppliers of that particular good, and they have, much like monopolistic, they have, start. So the last topic that we're going to be studying under forms of market is our last market form, which is oligopoly. Oligopoly is very similar in some respects and very different in other respects from the different market forms that we've studied so far, like the perfect competition or monopoly, monopolistic. तो इसका ये सारे features हैं, we'll look at them one by one, and basically that the cost of the revenue structure diagram is not very important for our syllabus for now, so we're kind of ignoring that. But these features are very important. It's a very important market form, and so we'll start looking at them, right? So the first characteristic of oligopoly is there are a small number of sellers, and by small we mean there are very few or a handful of sellers. तो हमने if we recapitulate, हमने perfect competition में देखा था that there were infinite sellers, there were a large number of sellers. हमने monopoly में देखा there's a single seller. Similarly, in in monopolistic, we saw that there are many sellers, but not as many as perfect competition. In oligopoly, we have a few sellers, which is even less than monopolistic, right? So what happens is, एक product है, एक market है, उसमें एक product है, and there are a handful of firms which are supplying that product. Like those people, the producers of this particular product are the ones who are in control of the supply side of the market, right? So these people only have the authority to produce that good and to sell it in the market, to supply it to people. Nobody else can, interfere in the production of that good, right? So the first one being there are a small number of sellers. The second being they have the ability to set price. This thing we are going to understand later on as we go about the other features, but for now the ability to set price means इन लोगों के पास इन producers के पास ये power है कि वो price को set कर सके. हमने perfect knowledge में देखा था people were the buyers and sellers all are price takers, right? This was perfect competition. हमने monopoly में देखा that the consumers were price takers, but the monopolist or the producer was a price maker. He was the price maker. PM doesn't mean prime minister or anything. It means he was the price maker because he had the ability to determine the price in the market by controlling the amount of good that he will supply, right, at a given price. In monopolistic, we saw that these people, because there were many firms and there were infinite number of consumers or buyers, these people had a low degree or somewhat, a low degree of market power, and they had the ability to influence the price, right? So ability to influence price, which is of course we're talking about the producers here. This is of the producers, right? So, and in oligopoly, people actually have the ability to set the price because there are so few firms that there is some sort of interdependency between those firms, and they have like for example, in a oligopolistic market, what happens is this is how the logic works. There's a handful of firms, let's just say there's 5 or 6 firms producing the same kind of good, right? So one of them increases the price. What happens is they do not get more revenue because of that increased price. अगर हम एक सामान बना के उसको बहुत हाई प्राइस पे बेचेंगे तो उसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि हमें ज्यादा पैसे आएंगे. उसका ये इम्प्लीकेशन होता है कि लोग उस फर्म से या उस प्रोड्यूसर से वो चीज खरीदना छोड़ देंगे और बाकी के जो बचे कुछ फर्म्स है उनसे वो सामान खरीदेंगे at a cheaper price, because that person is increasing the price. This is how demand works, right? So the consumers shift to other sellers, and when the person is decreasing their price, if they think कि मैं प्राइस गिरा देता हूँ, बाकियों का ज्यादा महंगा रहेगा तो मेरे पास ज्यादा कस्टमर्स आएंगे, मेरे पास ज्यादा बायर्स आएंगे, तो उसका इम्प्लीकेशन ये होता है, उसका आफ्टर इफेक्ट ये होता है कि बिकॉज ऑफ दैट पर्सन्स डिसीजन टू डिक्रीज द प्राइस of that good, the other firms, the rest of the firms will also decrease their price. This is what happens because no firm wants to lose their customers, no firm wants to lose their buyers. So the price setting gets influenced. Each firm has a level of control over the price setting mechanism, and what happens is they can influence each other's prices. एक ने बढ़ा दिया तो बाकी कांस्टेंट रहेंगे, इसके बायर्स डिवाइड हो जाएंगे बाकी के सेलर्स में, तो इसको वापस से गिराना पड़ेगा. एक ने कम कर दिया तो इसको ज्यादा बायर्स मिलने लगेंगे, सारे कम कर देंगे. So that is how they influence the price in the market. Also we have a term over here which is called price leadership. And what happens in price leadership is that there's one single firm. There's a single firm that that decides the level of prices, or that changes their prices according to their needs and interests, and the rest of the firms have to follow. So this single firm ये price को बढ़ा सकता है, गिरा सकता है, और बाकी के firms बिल्कुल वही चीज करेंगे. They will follow this person's decision. So their decision gets upholded, and that is why it's called price leadership, right? So the firms in oligopoly market have an ability to set price, and like we saw that there's like we're going to study later on, there's some sort of interdependence. The third is there are barriers to entry. Again, we've been studying barriers to entry in the rest of our discussions about forms of market. So is market structure, maybe there are barriers to entry in the market because that is why there are a few firms. And agar barriers to entry nahi hote, then there would be a large number of firms supplying, a large number of producers supplying that good, but it's not there. And that has to be because there are certain barriers to entry that prevent other people from joining the industry and increasing the number of producers. So this is how the mechanism works. And to list certain examples of barriers to entry, there might be government licenses, right? People, the producers might have government licenses that protect their interest of other people not joining the industry. There might be patents, right? There might be access to complex technology. The producers who are there in the market, they might have access to certain complex or expensive technology or raw materials that other people don't have access to. That is why they cannot join the industry. So these are examples of various barriers to entry. बाकी इसके बारे में तो हम काफी we have discussed this a lot in all of our market forms. So anyway, the moving on, the fourth characteristic is long run profits. So oligopoly actually makes profits in an oligopolistic market. The firms actually make profit in the long run, and the thing is, the motive of this sort of market is actually profit maximization. To contradict this, in perfect competition, we saw that they do not make any supernormal profit as such. Inka, they have the same price throughout, from whichever buyer you buy, from whichever seller you buy it, you will get it at the same price. So, but in oligopoly, there's a motive for profit maximization. The profit maximization is the motive of firms under this sort of market structure, and they actually make profits in the long run. Then the fifth characteristic of this is product differentiation. Now we've been talking about homogeneous and heterogeneous products, or close substitutes and perfect substitutes. And in oligopoly, what happens is there is certain differentiation of products, but it doesn't have to be of one form. There can be, close substitutes, or there can be perfect substitutes. They can be, heterogeneous or homogeneous products. To list an example of close substitutes, we can maybe say automobiles. We have various, companies manufacturing automobiles which serve the same purpose, but they might be different from one another in some respect through certain characters, certain features, right? So to list an example of close substitutes, let's say automobiles. And perfect substitutes being that, there's no difference in the product of each of this. There might be a number of firms who are selling this product, but there's basically no difference in the product. To list one such example is, let's say, steel. Steel is basically the same no matter which seller you're buying it from, no matter which factory you're producing it. Steel is the final output. It's basically the same. There's no differentiation in that product, right? So that is what we have about product differentiation in oligopoly. The next one is assumptions about perfect knowledge. Now, firms in the oligopolistic market have, they have perfect knowledge about their own cost structure and about the, market demand and everything. But since there are a small number of sellers, and each seller has some sort of an ability to set the price or to influence the price in the market, perfect knowledge is very much needed, and they need information not only about their own cost and revenue structures, but about the different firms, the other firms that are there. They need knowledge about their cost structures as well, or about their revenue structures as well, so that they are able to maximize their own profits. So whatever knowledge exists in that firm, it's basically about they have perfect information about their own cost and revenue structures, but they do not have as such perfect knowledge about the other firm's cost and revenue structures. So that brings us to perfect knowledge. Then, very important, there is interdependence between the firms. Like we discussed, the firms have, a degree of market control. So they are highly interdependent. Like we discussed, if a firm decreases its price of a particular good, the other firms will also follow, because they do not want to lose their buyers to that one particular firm. So there is a high level of interdependence, and they all compete with each other, to acquire the larger portion of the market, to acquire a large number of buyers. So there is a very high degree of interdependence, a very high degree of interdependence between the firms who are operating in an oligopolistic market. The last is there's non-price competition. So like we saw in monopolistic form of market, as such in oligopoly, there's non-price competition, they do not compete in terms of prices, they compete in terms of other things than prices. To list certain examples, there's loyalty schemes, there's ads or advertisements which we studied as selling cost of the firm, and then there's product differentiation. There might be close substitutes of the good when they are competing in terms of things other than price. So this is as in monopolistic, this is also a feature of oligopoly, that there is non-price competition. And a very important example of oligopoly is duopoly. In fact, what duopoly actually means is that there are just two firms in the market. Like we have monopoly, there's just one firm in the market. And monopoly is also, uske baare mein baat kare to, it is also a very special case of oligopoly. Oligopoly means there are few firms, right? So there might be 5-6 firms. Monopoly means there's just one firm, which is quite different from the features of oligopoly, but then again, it's a special case of oligopoly. And duopoly is another special case of oligopoly, which will have characteristics more similar to these than monopoly, even though that was just one firm and this is just two firms, but still its features, since there are two firms, and then that means there's competition, right? So in monopoly there's no competition, here there's competition. So that is why it has a lot of features, operating in this way. The features of duopoly are very similar to these, except they operate at a very stronger level, right? So there might be high degree of interdependence, and they might have a higher degree of control over the market. So that is what we have as duopoly, which is a very special case of oligopoly. The diagram, like I said before, is not very important. So the features are important, and this is all that we need to study about, and that's all that there is to oligopoly.